as I said, we have here today Mr. Baiju Vasani, who is a renowned leader in international dispute resolution. He has over 20 years of experience practicing both as counsel and arbitrator. He has experience of practice over 3 different continents, so he has different views from different cultural backgrounds. And he has been involved in over 100 high-value international disputes. He was described by his clients as a master strategist and a great storyteller. And this is the main reason why we invited him today to tell us what are his best tips about written advocacy. There will be no presentations, it will be just a conversation, but I will let Baiju to take the floor.
Thank you, Mihaela. When we talk about advocacy, everyone, I think, automatically assumes oral advocacy, because that's what really is considered the sexiest part of what we do. You get to articulate your position in front of a court or tribunal, and it takes a lot of skill and some courage to stand up in front of a tribunal and articulate your position. Written advocacy, though, is advocacy, and I would posit, actually, for international arbitration, the most important part of the advocacy process as compared to oral advocacy. And why is that? For those of you that do court work will know that court cases often go for weeks in actual trial. So you'll have days of witnesses. Opening statements might even take an entire week. Closing statements the same, and you'll have 8 to 12 weeks of evidence. And that's because the information, particularly in the common law system, is gathered as part of a process to present in the trial. International arbitration, being the hybrid child that it is between common law and civil law, and indeed other systems, has a much more contracted system for oral advocacy, and in fact a very protracted system compared to, for example, English litigation, for written advocacy. So I don't know how many of you have practiced in the UK or in London, but there is a style of international arbitration called the pleading style, which is more similar to the common law style, where you group the evidence, the witnesses, the experts, the submissions, and they come in separate formats. The memorial style, which I think most of us are more used to because it is the predominant style, is where all the information is put in at one go. So you put your submissions in with the witness statements, with the experts, and with the evidence in one foul swoop. That makes what you write much more prominent in international arbitration. So as much as I would love to give a talk on oral advocacy, I think I'm quite privileged to be able to talk to such an important topic. The other reason I think it is so important is what you will, some of you may already sit as arbitrator. I've been sitting for about 10 years now, just under 10 years. And being on now both sides of the equation, I am an unabashed double hatter. I think one has to be a double hatter at some stage in one's career before one can really jump. And I can tell you that being on the other side of the equation has given me quite a few insights into what is good written advocacy and what is not. Now, of course, that is personal to me. And so what I wanted to do is, rather than give a usual précis of be concise, be accurate, etc., etc. I thought I'd just give you some insights into what I like and dislike as an arbitrator, and what I understand some of my peers in the arbitration community like and dislike. And again, why it's so important is that I will read everything you write if I'm the arbitrator before I go into the hearing, of course. And I will have already formed some opinion as to the case. Of course, I will. That's not to say one doesn't keep an open mind when one goes into the hearing, but the truth is that by the time the arbitrator gets into the hearing, he or she will already have formed an opinion, a preliminary opinion, as to the merits of your case. I promise you, it is easier to convince someone of your position from a blank slate than it is to change someone's mind once they have formed an opinion based on what you have written. Often, and this is unfortunate, and I very much stop myself from doing this, but it's a natural human condition. There is something called confirmation bias, where as a human, you receive information, you make a particular point of view, and you say, oh, this is my preliminary opinion. What tends to happen then is once you've already made that opinion, it's very natural to find information that supports that position as opposed to things that oppose that position. So again, what you're trying to do is get across as early as possible your position in the best possible way. So with that, let me start with some of the obvious points, because I think since this is being recorded, I think it is important that we have a little bit of the usual takeaways of written advocacy. I really do love simplicity. I am not a big fan of long, flowery sentences. I went to law school in the United States. I spent a lot of time in the United States. And the one thing I do think they do very well is legal writing. Short sentences, simple sentences, I think can convey an idea just as well or better than long sentences, often compound sentences. The second point, I think, is precision. I very much appreciate when the submission gets to the point and focuses on the point that's important for me to decide. Distracting points often sound good, and they're helpful to appease a client who doesn't like a particular point. But actually, if it's a side issue, I tend to not devote any or much time to it, even as an arbitrator. I'm really focused on what I need to get to the key part of the case. I think structure is critically important. So I'm sure all of you do this, but you should spend at least 25% of the time that you totally spend on writing something on the structure. Because if you don't get the order right, the logic right, the headings right, and know exactly how it falls, I think you can get stuck pretty quickly. And if you start writing too quickly, you'll get stuck. Book writers tell you the same, and they'll say spend a lot of time developing the structure before you start putting pen to paper.
Can I interject
yes, please,
here?
Of course.
About the structure. I know there are different styles. You said about the American one, where they usually start with the conclusion, like this has been a breach of the contract, and then they'll continue to explain the facts and the law. I've seen in the European style is the other way around. They explain the fact, this happened, this is the law, therefore there's a breach of the contract. Which one do you feel is more persuasive, or maybe it depends on the background of the person who is assessing that evidence, well, that memorial?
I always follow what the US call IRAC, IRAC, which I find the most simple way of approaching it. I being introduction, So as you said, and that's really actually a conclusion, but an introductory point. R is reasoning. So you say, what is the reasoning? What is the evidence? A is application. You apply that reasoning to the facts, and C is conclusion. So you do top and tail with somewhat of an intro conclusion, and in between you have the reasoning and then the application of the reasoning. I do like to make the point up front first, so that I know where you're going, essentially, because you can otherwise get lost in the paragraph and not know exactly what's the point this person is trying to make.
I agree.
Yeah.
And one of the
Please.
things that I notice in submissions is sometimes if you read just the first sentence of every paragraph, you might get a sense of the submission if they follow the structure that you just explained. So even if you don't have too much time and if you just, skimming through paragraph, I want to know what that issue is, I will just look at the first 2, 3, 5 words and I will know exactly what they want to talk about.
It's a very good point. I'm going to come on to that when I talk about things I like. And why don't I just talk about it now, since you were, I like to be able to read your table of contents and understand your case. So it's slightly different from what you said, but actually similar in that your headings should tell a story. So let me tell you, and the same is in PowerPoint, by the way, in demonstratives. You can put something like the contract, okay, at the top of your PowerPoint or on your heading. And then when you go to the table of contents, it will just say the contract. Or you could say something as simple as the contract is plain and clear, right? Now, actually, just the heading itself tells the arbitrator what is the message I'm trying to convey by a heading. And then you can just read the table of contents, similar to your point about reading the first sentence, and you get the structure, you get the picture without any of the meat. So I think I agree with you. I think it's a very important point to make it as simple as possible. The final point on submissions, I think, is obviously persuasiveness. Persuasiveness, people think persuasiveness comes from language, right? If I use the word conclusively or absolutely or, any of extremely, that is what is persuasive. That's not what persuasiveness means. Persuasiveness is application of evidence and facts to law. Persuasiveness comes from the actual content, not the language. One final point, and this probably I come away from maybe the more British style of writing, is I like theme. As an arbitrator, I do want to try and understand why parties did what they did, either from a commercial perspective or investor state, why a state acted a particular way, why an investor acted a particular way. And I find thematic very important for me to contextualize evidence. Now, the British style is very much motivations and right, all these things, they're not relevant. It's true, right? Why a party entered into a contract is not relevant. What a party thinks about a clause and the English law is not relevant because you read the contract as it is. But I do find it interesting to me, and this is probably because I'm more an international arbitration lawyer than I am even an English lawyer, and maybe some of that civil law has seeped in. But I do like to understand what the parties thought, why they entered into it. So I do recommend theming as a very important point. And one must always remember, until we're advocating before AI robots, and I hope I'm not doing that anytime soon, we are still humans as arbitrators, and you need to move the heart as well as the head. And I do think it's important that you pick a theme and you stick with the theme throughout, like a leitmotif. You don't overplay it, but I think it's important to give some justice if you're the claimant, or some part of your defense if you're the respondent. Very quickly on witness statements, I find witness statements sometimes always make the following errors. They are a repetition of the submission. Really, there was no need. They simply narrate the documents, right? So I signed this, and this is what that document said, and then I did this letter, and this is what that letter says. I can read that for myself as an arbitrator. The third big mistake I think people make in witness statements is to put lawyer language, to make it sound like the lawyer. I once had a case, I remember, where the witness said, what the country did to us was neither fair nor equitable. Right now, just so happens that the witness is parroting what the treaty says. Obviously not the witness's language. And so it's very hard for me to form a human impression of the witness when I see such a heavy-handed approach from the lawyers as to the witness testimony. I think expert reports are quite similar. I also don't like to see the lawyer's hand in expert reports because they're meant to be independent. I don't like expert reports that are advocacy, because the thing an expert needs to do is to show me that he or she is independent, right? That they have credibility. And the more they're simply taking extreme positions or parroting one side's position, or it could literally be another position from the lawyers, the less it's credible. And in fact, if I see where sometimes the expert has pushed back on a position, then I take that lawyer, that expert very seriously. If they say, well, you know, my party puts X, Y, and Z, and I agree with 5 but not 2, fantastic, because then I feel, okay, this person is independent, and those 5 are critical and the 2 are not. But the fact that they have rejected the 2 makes me feel that that is a good report. And the way that the lawyer then deals with the 2, I think, is very important. Right, let me move on to my likes and dislikes now being on this side of the table. I have grown to very much dislike adjectives and adverbs. And what I do now in my own writing is I write, and there are always going to be adjectives and adverbs because we like to put them in. But what I then do is as a separate exercise, I go through my letter or my submission and I look at each adjective and adverb and I say, do I really need it? Right? Does it confirm or does it strongly confirm? It confirms. I take out strongly. So I really do de-adjective or de-adverb my submissions because, and you'll see that it actually becomes a cleaner document once you take those out. And then the ones you do actually use have more power because they are there on their own. Other things, please.
Sorry. I'm curious about the parties who start to designate terms as factual terms, but they actually subjective terms. And I'll just give an example. For example, they make an allegation of a corruption. And then whenever they're referring to the party, the other party that is involved in corruption or arguably involved, they will say the corrupt party. And they will use the same term over and over again to kind of persuade the arbitrator of a fact that actually is a subjective interpretation. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, you know, actually, I don't mind it being done. It's not. I'll tell you what. I've seen it less on the part. I've seen it more when they talk about documents, the secret memo, right? Or the as you said, the corrupt transaction. And I think that's a powerful tool. And sometimes, you know, you'll be surprised, but the other side will use your term, right? Amazingly, they'll just pick it up and start using it as well. And suddenly that document, which should be the September memo, will become the secret memo. So sometimes it's worth trying. And then look, if you're sending subliminal messages, one never knows. What I don't like is if it's not done in what I would say a professional way. And really, rather than just simply using it as a moniker or as you said, a defined term in a professional manner, it's more emotional or personal. then yeah, then I start. Then it will be a turnoff to say, well, you're labeling something I haven't yet found to be corrupt, in a manner that I think is accusatory. So as long as it's done, let's say, on the right side of the line, I think it's effective. Once it starts becoming invective, I think it'll have an adverse reaction from the tribunal. And that really goes to another point, which I think has gotten out of control, and that is the squabbling between lawyers, right? The accusations, exaggerations, the egregiousness, and the bad faith, and this is the worst conduct they've ever seen, and blah, blah, blah. I'll tell you, when you're a lawyer, you're really into it, right? You're like, oh, they're bad and they're bad. Honestly, as arbitrator, you look at it and you don't find the tribunal are that moved by anything either party does, unless it's really egregious. But most of the time, it's not that egregious. It's just procedural posturing, or using things to their advantage, which, frankly, as long as it's ethical, is a fair part of the game. So I think one should always remember the following: arbitrators care less about your procedural squabble than you think they do. What arbitrators want is a solution to the squabble. They want less squabbling and more solutions. So when you are in a squabble, it's very important to tell the tribunal, here's how to fix it, right? Adopt this, and here's how, and in a way that maybe compromises a little bit and gives each party something, but in a way that is much more preferential to you. I think if you feel that the arbitrator is going to 100% absolutely take your side on every issue, it's very unlikely. The other thing I don't like, as I said, when it gets personal, I think that's especially between lawyers. I think lawyers are doing a job, and when one lawyer accuses other law firms or lawyers of malpractice, or they're going to report them to the bar or the SRA, I find that very unfortunate. One other thing I find, and this really loses credibility with me, is misquoting or selectively quoting evidence or legal authorities, right? You give me one sentence, but you cut it off, or you give me one sentence and not another sentence. I lose trust. And I think it's a very dangerous way to proceed. Other thing.
I very much agree with that. Whenever I work as tribunal secretary, that's my first priority, to check the codes that the party give. And you will be surprised how many times they edit those and take some things out, and it's just wow. I'm absolutely shocked that they go so far, thinking that no one will notice, and it looks so bad, because then you have to be super alert and scrutinize absolutely everything, because you don't trust anything.
Then you don't trust everything else, right? And what I'll tell you, the most important thing for a lawyer before a tribunal is your credibility, because half of the battle is credibility. And you yourself, if you are a name, or your law firm is a name, that is half the battle, right? That you're given a presumption of credibility because of who you are. Once you lose that, it's very difficult to get back. Another pet peeve, and I think this is becoming, again, out of control, is length. Length of submissions. Now, I've had ICSID submissions which are well over 500, 600 pages. It's very difficult as a tribunal to read that much material. There's just too much material. I always say that it's best to have the arbitrator read your paper in one go, right? Even if it takes them 3 or 4, it'll be over several days, or with gaps, and you forget things. It's better just to read it in one go. And I find that's about 150 for me, right? I can read nicely, deeply, on a chair with my highlighter, with my pen, about 150 in one go. So I always look for about the 150 as a max for any of my filings, no matter how complicated or complex the material, if I can. I find that if it's much longer, it will definitely become sort of a distraction or a kitchen sink approach. Then very quickly with a few more, and then I'll open the floor. I don't like parties who hide their weaknesses. So when you're writing about the points, just say, yeah, this is a weak point in my, or this is what the other side says a weak point in my case. Here's how I'm going to address it. Don't try and hide it. Huge footnotes, I think, are crazy. If it's going in the brief, there shouldn't be a difference if it's in the footnote or in the actual text itself. If it's worth going in, it's worth going in. I don't like big annexes being put onto briefs, because for me that's just another brief. And then very quickly, maybe I'll give you a few things I like, and then we'll open it out to the Q&A. I like executive summaries at the beginning. I call that my 90-second pitch. In the United States, you have skyscrapers. It takes about 90 seconds, sorry, not 90, 90 seconds to get to the top floor. And you have the CEO of the company, and you have to convince her why she should adopt your idea. You've got 90 seconds, go. And I like executive summaries to put that at the beginning. As I already said, I like table of contents, which I can read, and you can kind of read what the brief means. I love demonstratives, pictures, maps, charts, graphs. I'm a huge fan of those. You can spend paragraphs writing about something, which you can just say in a single picture. I think that's fantastic. Just a couple of other things I like, which is not necessarily part of the written submission, but I think makes an arbitrator's life very easy. A glossary of terms. Dramatis personae. I like pictures of my witnesses. It just helps me to imagine them as I'm reading their witness statements. I like chronologies. And if you don't give me a chronology, I am going to make my own. If you give me one and it's good, I'll adopt it, and that will give you an automatic advantage. And finally, I really like decision trees if it's done well. If it's one-sided and doesn't really take into account the other side's positions, then I won't adopt it. But a decision tree, what you really want to do is make the arbitrator's life easy. And all of those things I'm saying are guided towards that one point. So, Mihaela, maybe I'll stop there.
Yes, no worries. I will add to that a list of common and agreed issues.
Very good. Yes, although I'll tell you what, it's
very difficult to get one, but
yeah,
they managed to agree in little. It's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you can just do it from a one side, like one party can say, here is where I believe we agree. And again, I agree. I think that's very helpful. But all of these things for me are part of written advocacy. And the more you make the tribunal's life easy, the more they're going to rely on you and what you write. And it's all about building rapport, building credibility, building a bridge for the tribunal to say, come my side and I will guide you to a proper award.
And if you want to make things a bit even more complicated for the parties, but easier for the tribunal to ask for agreed issues of law, sometimes it happens.
That one, I'll tell you, yeah, it happens. It depends. I've seen that done very easily in exit annulment cases, because there's usually very little difference between them on the law. There are some points of domestic law where there can be an agreement. International law, for example, the meaning of fair and equal treatment, or umbrella clause.
It will never happen. They will bring two different books.
Yeah, it'll never happen.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of good tips. I've been taking some notes as well. I want to open the floor to questions. I have seen there's a question from Emily. And if you want, you can turn your camera on and mic. If not, I can ask the question myself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Very faintly.
I'm sorry, I'm in a public space right now, so I'm afraid I will not be able to turn my camera on. But my question was essentially about, first of all, I'm very new to the legal system, and my question was about whether you believe that pursuing the solicitor route, like the SQE, would offer an advantage, like a competitive edge, when it comes to written advocacy in arbitration compared to the barrister route.
Well, in terms of putting that into a written advocacy context, I think so. The question was barrister versus solicitor in terms of the style. Barristers, I think, have a very specific style to court, right? And you'll find they have a much shorter, punchier style, which can be good. For me, international arbitration has always been a solicitor practice. Barristers traditionally were international arbitration specialists in relation to court cases which arose out of international arbitration practice. If one wanted to have an international arbitration career where one would practice, let's say, all arbitration all day, solicitor's the way to go. And it really is the place where you will hone your skills in written advocacy on international arbitration, working in teams. One of the most important things as a partner, and indeed as a senior associate, is to develop the teams. Who's going to write what? Make sure all the trains run together. People are writing on like silly things, but so important. People are using the same template. People are using the same, the styles and formats, so that when you put it together, it doesn't all crush and it takes, the secretary 10 days to separate it all out. Making sure people are using consistent citations, consistent defined terms, understanding the theme. All of that, for me, you learn as part of a law firm. At some stage, it's good to be a barrister and you can be an independent practitioner. But really, if you want to learn the nuts and bolts of international arbitration, there is no better place than a law firm.
Thank you very much.
Milka, I see you have a question as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Baiju, for this precise and quite short and simple explanation on written advocacy. I have a question on your point on weak arguments. You said, if I recall correct, that you are a fan of conceding them. Is it simply conceding them, or is it ideally also explaining probably the weak argument?
Yeah, I would never concede. Actually, I'm not a big fan of conceding arguments. There are some barristers who concede arguments, and before judges, that's not a bad thing to do, because judges actually quite like when a barrister doesn't take a point that he or she could take, but concedes it. In international arbitration, we tend not to do that. If you want to rule against me on that, then you rule against me on that. So my point was not concession. My point was hiding. So what I tend to, and it's tricky, right? So let's say you're bringing a case, and many things could be said against you. Do you, in your first filing, talk about all those things? The answer is no, right? Because why preempt what the other side are going to say? Okay. However, where the point is so obvious that it is a manifest defect, potentially a manifest defect in your case, then absolutely I would address it. Because I think it's better to get out in front of it, to already define it for the tribunal. And so actually the other side is responding to your position on that point, rather than you saying nothing, the other side coming in and slamming you, and then you look very defensive in saying, well, yeah, okay, that's true, but this, but that. So it's a fine line knowing which weaknesses to address up top, which to, let's see if sleeping dogs lie, because they may not pick up the point. But the ones that are obvious, I always go out. And then even in your opening presentation at the hearing or in your rejoinder, you have to address your weaknesses. It's fine talking about just your points, but I find that a lot of lawyers don't really get into the weak spots of their case. They think it's just better to bury it or ignore it and it will go away. And I think for tribunals, certainly when I'm sitting on tribunal and an advocate takes the points on weaknesses and say, look, here's why these are not fatal to my case, I find that very powerful.
I agree. Thank you very much. And I think we have another question probably in the chat.
Yes, we have one from Ellen. Ellen, do you want to address the question, or shall we do it?
I could. Mihaela.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the concept of being very precise and concise. I was wondering, in complex cases where the issues involve a lot of technicality, how not to oversee those issues, but also keep being precise and concise?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So I'll give you two types of cases: complex cases, and then where the other side is purposely making it more complex than it is. Right? I think there's two different. What I'm not saying is, of course, that in complex cases one should make it so simple that the tribunal can't get to grips with the complexity, and that's an impossibility. However, I still think it's critical to make it as simple as possible, as concise as possible, despite the complexity. One way of doing that is a lot of the complexity will probably be technical. And if that's the case, one can deal with it in the expert reports and in the witness statements. So you can have some of the complexity detailed in the evidence itself. The point of the submission then is not to repeat the complexity, but to draw out the threads from that complexity and make it as simple as possible. Does that make sense? So I don't subscribe to the idea that a complex case needs 500 pages. I think you can have a 150 pages by having the material you need in the expert reports and the witness statements, and then making a very crisp and clear analysis using 150 pages. Where I think it's harder is where the other side use what I call the kitchen sink approach, right? So you've got a case, breach of contract. They didn't pay me my money. Okay, 5 pages. The other side come back with 10 arguments, you know, something from 20 years ago, something that's going to happen in tomorrow, just everything under the sun. Now, what do you do as a party that's got a simple case? You've got two choices. You either are very brave and say, I'm not even going to address that stuff, right? And I want to focus because it's not relevant and I want to focus on this. Or, which is what most clients want to do, you then have to go the same route and address every single point that they make. And that makes life very difficult. Again, I think this one's a difficult one because if you are very brave and say, I'm only going to stick to the point, and then actually they win on one of those other points that they threw in, your client's going to look at you and say, that wasn't very good, right? You're in trouble. So in a way, the most conservative way to approach it is to address those points. So honestly, I think one has to address them, but it's the manner in which they're addressed. I think you have to then prioritize them in your way, not the way that they were done by the other side. And you have to give them credit. And the ones that genuinely don't bear credence, it's very good to give them the back of the hand treatment and get rid of them. And then ultimately, you have to trust the tribunal to give you costs for having to deal with so much irrelevance. But again, and I do that very strictly, by the way. If I find one party just made my life really difficult and the other side's life really difficult unnecessarily, I'm putting a big costs order against them. I hate when tribunals are so laissez-faire and let everyone do what they want, and at the end they don't really even put the balance together on the costs. I find that very unfortunate because it encourages this type of approach.
Thank you.
Sveta, I understand you also have a question.
Yes, thank you. So my question is whether you can share a story or tell us an anecdote about a time where you received constructive feedback on your writing, probably as a more junior practitioner, and how that impacted your writing style.
Absolutely. So this was actually it was probably my first serious brief. right? And I'll say this was back in probably 2002. I wrote, it was a Brazilian case about a power plant. Not a very interesting topic, but and I wrote what I thought was a fantastic piece. And the feedback I got, the constructive feedback I got, was that it was far too what he called journalistic. And what he meant by that was that I wasn't doing what I said originally in the introduction, reasoning, application, conclusion. My writing had too many adjectives, too many adverbs, too many sentences, and I was just writing with passion as opposed to dispassionately with the application of the standards. Now, he said, and to be fair, he said, look, if this was in a newspaper, it's fantastic, right? It moves me as a piece of writing. But as a tribunal member, there's not much I can do with this, right? Because you haven't been as didactic as you could. And from then on, I was very careful to make sure that I sort of took off that passionate hat and put on a much more focused hat of taking things in a very logical and sequential way. And really, as I said, the best way to do that is to start with your headings. Actually spend time on the language of your headings so you know exactly what you're going to say. And then within those headings, I make bullets for each thing I'm going to say in that, right? So I don't just start writing. It's structure first, then bullets within each. So it's a structure within the structure. And only then, when I know the logical, literally the skeleton, do I put the meat on the bones. And that was very different from what I did in that first piece, which was just, let me tell you a story about this terrible government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sveta. I wonder if there are any other questions. If not, I will address one and then we can close the session. I have a practical one.
Yeah.
You probably know that in English litigation, usually when the parties apply for an order to the court, they will attach a draft of that order. Have you seen this in international arbitration? I haven't seen it. And I wonder whether you think that is useful. For example, if they apply for provisional measures, they already prepare a draft of the procedure order with the relief, the background, and so on. How would you feel as an arbitrator if one of the party does that?
So I have seen it, only by English counsel.
Of course.
It annoys me when I'm on the other side, right? Not as the arbitrator. When I'm on the other side, it annoys me because I find it presumptuous, right? To say, here, I'm spoon feeding you what to say. I have not had it as an arbitrator. So no party has done that. And in fact, usually that's because I say, whenever there's a procedural issue, I say one more response and then I don't want anything else and I'll make my own order. How would I feel? I don't think I'd use it. I'd feel, honestly, I think because arbitrators have this need to be super independent from the parties, I just wonder whether there'll be a slight hesitation to use something in your own order that has been written by the parties, even sentences of it written by the parties, even though, of course, in the award, you may have things written by the parties that form part of your award. I think most arbitrators would not use it. I don't think anyone would be offended by it, but it's not, as you said, it's not common practice. I don't think I would do it if I was. I've never done it as counsel. I do make it easy though in saying, here's what it needs to say, right? You have to address this. But what I wouldn't do is have a separate piece of paper and say, sign here. There's something that doesn't quite work about that in international arbitration.
I can understand the reluctance of arbitrators, but at the same time, it can be useful to understand one party's position because I had moments when I read the submission or an application and tried to figure out, okay, but what are you asking?
What are you asking? That's a very nice way of putting it. Yeah, which is why I do it a different way, which is in the submission, I'm very clear as to what exactly I want, right? So in the therefore request the following relief, and then you basically lay out the structure of what you want, but without actually writing the sentences for the arbitrator.
The mix of both. There's a very last question in the chat, if we can address that quickly. It's from Ivy. She says she cannot turn her camera on, so I'll read the question. And her question is the following. When a disputed point is both a question of law and of fact, what kind of evidence is more relied upon that is tribunal friendly?
Wow. So look, I always just thinking about evidence. So the different types of evidence are documents, right? Experts, witnesses, and I guess case law, right? Let's say those are kind of things one could rely on. For me, documents are and I think for every tribunal member, documents are the absolute key, right? They tell the story. Then probably the other three, for me, are the fill in the gaps. So the witnesses will tell me information which the documents either don't tell me or fill the bridges between the documents. Why, as I said, why a party did what they did. The experts will explain maybe things that is not within my technical knowledge. So what does 0.532 grams, right, per square foot mean in a mine? Is that a great mine or is that a bad mine? And then the case law it depends, of course, if it's binding or simply persuasive. That will tell me what another third-party fact finder has done, either on the same or similar facts. And then if I take all of those things, those three together, it's helpful, it's contextual, but for me, nothing is more important than the actual contract itself or what any particular document will tell me, because that doesn't, unless of course there's fraudulent documents, which is a whole different ball game and getting worse with AI, but the document doesn't lie.
The exhibits take priority.
100%, which is why I always say, as a junior associate, if you want to be at the heart of winning cases, right, choose to do the documents, right? Be the one, it's the worst, some people find it the worst bit, but be the person who goes through the docs, who goes through the contracts, who describes the contract in the submission, who writes, summarizes the letters. A lot of the associates, they want to go around the world and meet the experts or meet the witnesses or hang out with the client or do the international law stuff. It's great. But if you want to be the one who's going to win the case, get into the docs. Be the document wizard. Very right. That was me, by the way. I was the document guy. Yeah. I used to love just knowing the contract inside out. Right. And then the partner calls you and says, hey, what? And I'll say, yeah, 17.2 says this, but 14.7 is the opposite, and this and that. And you really then become the most critical person, because then all this other stuff is said. And when you get to the hearing, all the tribunal cares about is the contract.
100%. And this will ensure that you're going to have a position on that case for a long time.
That is also true. Very, very politically well said about law firm life. I said good things about law firm life, but you also have to make yourself sticky, as they say. Correct.
Thank you very much for all the points on written advocacy, but also in general, how to establish ourselves as good associates and future good arbitrators. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We're going to publish the recording and a summary of it on Use Connect, and we're going to have a next session on the 13th of November about oral advocacy. I look forward to see you there again, and I wish you everyone a lovely afternoon or end of the day, or just enjoy the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.